Thanks. It's nice to see just how Windows works. All right, so I'm going to talk not so much about HighWire as about interviews that HighWire has done with a set of open access authors, but I thought at the beginning I should at least tell you what HighWire is doing in open access. 1,700 journals going to 2,300 when we add Project Muse, books 1,100 going to 33,000 about a year from now, 150 publishers, 7 million articles. Of those 7 million articles, 2.3 million are essentially embargoed OA. That is, they're free now as a result of being older than 12 months. About 300 journals are doing this embargoed OA. The number of OA journals at HighWire right now is at 55. It's growing steadily. And the number of journals, not on this slide, I checked the number of journals that are doing hybrid OA is about 350. So HighWire publishers are really interested in open access. Now, one of the ways HighWire serves its publishers is by doing interviews with researchers, scholars, students, clinicians, and so on, to identify what's really on their minds and how do their workflows look, where are they working and not working for them. So we've done quite a series of interviews, and in the most recent set, we've interviewed clinicians and recently interviewed OA authors. Now these are pretty preliminary interviews here. Anywhere from 10 to 15 people will be interviewed in an ethnographic style interview, about 90 minutes each. And you can just imagine what it takes to get 90 minutes from a clinician. You have to make 6 appointments. So the OA authors that we've interviewed, I haven't finished writing up the results yet, so I'm only going to talk about the 9 Stanford authors that we've interviewed. 6 postdocs, 3 assistant professors, so it sort of skews toward the younger group. They're all Stanford, they're all in STM. The other authors we interviewed were all in humanities and social sciences, and they do look a little different. And they've all published in an OA journal in the last year. So are they different from the other authors that we've interviewed? We've done about 60 other interviews. They're not very different, other than being a little bit younger, but they're more likely to be interdisciplinary. They seem less likely to have focused on just 1 or 2 journals for their reading. And I'm not sure whether this is because they're younger or whether that's a general fact of people who are doing OA publishing. We can't tell whether it's correlational or what. They're less likely to keep up based on journals. In other words, they're not so much reading journals as tracking the publications of key people in their field, whether they be competitors, co-authors, and so on. They have told us, for example, that they don't read based on journals. They find articles through PubMed and through Google Scholar, and they trace ideas through the literature. They get alerts from their students, not from databases. Which suggests that there's actually a social aspect to this. It may not be social media exactly, but it's certainly social. And finally, they really are more likely to be looking for things just in time, that is, doing a search when they need something, as opposed to just in case reading where they every week they'll browse the latest articles in Journal X or Journal Y. So there's some differences. I wouldn't want to make it sound categorical. It's not, but they're there. So we asked them, how do they decide to submit to a particular journal? There's probably, all of you who are journal publishers, you probably know the answers here, but it's good to look at them from the standpoint of OA authors. And there are, I think, 6 different things that we talked about with them. So first was prestige. They said probability assessment. You shoot as high as you can without wasting your time. The interesting thing about prestige here is that people talked about impact factor, but But it turned out none of them knew the impact factors of the journals they were submitting to. And when we pursued that a little, they said, well, you know, it's really not impact factor. We mean prestige. What's prestige? Well, it turned out that meant the impact factor in my subdiscipline. In other words, it's not the global impact factor of a journal. It's how important is this journal to my peers, to my potential audience of readers. Basically, will my paper published here find its right readers? That's prestige. Speed of publication, very important. I got scooped, so I submitted to PLOS One for quick publication. They don't care about novelty. Just as Kristen said, it's not about novelty. But what was important here, I think, is, and it may be obvious to everybody who's been involved in PLOS One, it wasn't obvious to me, is that this attribute of PLOS One has nothing to do with open access. It has everything to do with speed. I got scooped. I need to get a paper into the literature this week. Very, very important. And this comment, not exactly this text, but this comment came from about half of our respondents. And I'll show you a picture of them a little bit later. The readership. A lot of interesting quotes here. This first one is kind of interesting because it tells you what people think. As I think a previous speaker said, it sort of stands to reason that if papers are OA, they're going to be more seen, read, and cited. Now, we know that the research disagrees on whether they're actually more cited, but there seems to be pretty good consistency about them being seen and read. More people can read it. That's good for me. This was interesting. My field is highly specialized. All my readers will have institutional access. OA is really of low value to me. In other words, I'm not going to make a decision based on open access. The audience is the most important factor. Most authors post copies. This makes OA irrelevant. The same author later, the same interviewee later told us that their lab as a policy doesn't submit to journals that don't allow authors to post copies on their own website. Some other characteristics. This was kind of interesting, sort of obvious as soon as somebody tells you that ethnographic research has a lot of these aha moments in it where somebody tells you something and suddenly you think, oh, of course. How do I decide to submit to a particular journal? I look to see if there are articles similar to mine in it. So you basically put in your topic into the search engine and see what comes back. We also found that people will search the databases, PubMed, Google Scholar, with their topic and see what journals come back. Not just what articles, but what journals come back. It's an obvious way of finding a journal. As I mentioned earlier, most of our interviewees here were multidisciplinary. So they're looking for journals that fit their kind of literature. I have a young lab. We can't afford OA fees, so the cost is a critical factor for this PI. This is the journal policies item I mentioned before. If a journal prohibits reprints, we won't submit there. All other things being equal, I consider OA. It isn't a major consideration. A lot of other things come before that, except being scooped. If you've been scooped, that's what it feels like. This is my new favorite slide. I found many uses for this slide. This is about life. All right. Where have you published OA? Now remember, this is an STM group of interviewees, so it's fairly specialized. But about 40% of our interviewees published in PLOS One. Quite a few of them had also published in PLOS, and I think one in Biomed Central. This was interesting. I don't mean this in any negative way about PLOS One. It was just one of the statements we got. People say it's necessary to publish in PLOS One because of getting scooped. We asked a few questions about the features of journals. How important is a journal homepage? I never go there. If I want the instructions to authors, I Google it. And this was kind of interesting because it didn't occur to me that that's what people do. That I would have thought, oh, they'll Google the journal, then they'll go to the journal, then they'll look for the instructions to authors. No, not what they do. And in fact, it works better to Google it. It's easier to find the instructions to let Google find the instructions to authors than to hunt on the homepage. And as we all know, if I want an article, I Google it or I find it via PubMed. So the homepage is not the focus for authors. It's not where they go. Now, they do want some things. I think my last slide is going to be a little bit about what they're looking for from OA authors, from OA journals, and that information has to be visible. It'll probably be linked on the homepage. So mega journals, that's just another way of saying PLOS One. That's the mega journal that our respondents were most familiar with. They have special needs because the volume and variety of content that's in one place. It's not like a journal that has a weekly issue of 20 articles. There must be at least 100 a day. So there's some special requirements that kind of journal has. But what's interesting, I mean, you might call PLOS One too big to read. It's just a new kind of publication. It's more like a database. And the interesting thing from HighWire's perspective about that is that when HighWire started in 1995, essentially what differentiated what we were doing from what others were doing in putting journals online is we thought of journals as databases. And that's because we started with the Journal of Biological Chemistry, which published about 120 articles a week, and it was a little Manhattan phone book every week, which of course nobody could read. And we figured out, well, that they're really searching. So we built search engines and all this when everybody else was doing page flipping. And I think it's interesting, we may have gotten away from that understanding as we tried to make online journal sites prettier, more engaging, more visually attractive. Maybe we should be thinking more about making them easier to skim. In other words, PLOS One has a requirement to deal with this. Everybody should deal with it. The expressions that we got about being easy to skim, that we hear that from our other 60 interviewees. It's not just people who use PLOS One say it has to be easy to skim. So all journals really need to solve the PLOS One problem. I would say the exception, after having made that categorical statement, the exception, I would say we found in our interviews with clinicians. A lot of clinicians are still reading paper journals, and they like the experience of reading paper journals. They even like it more than reading paper journals on tablets. So there is a different kind of purpose involved with clinicians reading. I wouldn't say that they don't have to be easy to skim, but that's not the only thing they have to be. So one of the respondents told us that one of the problems with PLOS One is that they had recently made a change which made it much harder to use because the homepage, I think it was the homepage or maybe it was the search engine, would only show 10 articles per page. And he said, I need to see 100. I can't get through it at 10 per time. I'm just going to go away. We heard that one interesting thing was to be ranking articles by metrics. But our interviewees were sophisticated enough, they even mentioned this, that you could only do that for articles that were the same age. Now in PLOS, remember, 100 articles a day, there are a lot of articles that are the same age, exactly the same age. So this is really quite valuable in the PLOS context. And rapid browsing, especially rapid browsing of figures. Again, this is something we all need to do. PLOS has shown us a good way to do it, but we all need to do this. I'd say the other thing that this did not really come up in the interviews, but what you want to think about as you design easy to skim is think about the versions of articles that appear elsewhere. In other words, where you don't control the interface. So the article that appears in PubMed. What can you do to make it easy to skim? Well, eventually I hope you'll be able to put in a visual abstract. But for now, pretty much what you can do is use a good title. We have evidence from our other interviews that people want declarative titles. That is like a declarative sentence, the kind we were taught to write in grammar school. Think about how you would make your content easy to skim when it's not in your own interface. Commenting was interesting. Kristen brought up commenting. This was what was interesting about it, and I think this fits Kristen's comments on commenting, is that pretty much everybody looked at it and said, this has potential, but nobody uses it. There aren't any comments. We heard that the login discouraged use, and people thought maybe that was why. But people definitely said it's potentially valuable. It could be informative. We heard in our other set of interviews that the kind of commentary people want is expert commentary. They don't want to read my mother's comments on an article in PLOS One. Well, maybe my father does, I don't know. No, actually my father especially doesn't. But they really want to read expert commentary. So this would be the commentary, and some journals are working on this, eLife and others, to put in the commentary from the reviewers, or if you will, commentary from the authors themselves on their paper. So it's experts whose comments are of most interest. Article level metrics, big topic. One interesting thing, again, this is the STM interviews that we did. In the social science and humanities interviews, none of the interviewees knew anything about article level metrics, hadn't heard of it, hadn't seen it. In the STM group, they pretty much all knew what it was. 40% of them use it to evaluate, but they said it's really only one factor in assessment, and again, surprisingly, they were aware of its limitations. They understood that this, is not a magic number that tells you exactly how important this article is, and especially not how important it is to you. But what they did tell us is 40% of them use it to evaluate articles as readers, but they all use it as authors. So, vanity rules. These two are from the same person. All right, that's the fun of doing ethnographic interviews. you get to stare at stuff like that and say, yep, they are self-conscious. It's good. People told us that article level metrics don't help them much as a reader because the metrics only appear after they've already made a decision to go to the effort to fetch the article. Now, that might not be true forever. I can certainly imagine a PubMed interface that tells you the number of sites that an article has when you're looking in the search result display in PubMed. Maybe that's already there. We heard that people said that nothing other than time cited is useful. So they're skeptical about the other types of metrics, the alt of alt metrics. Alt metrics is article level metrics and alternative metrics. People definitely seem more comfortable with the article level metrics, time cited, and also usage levels. But another person said it's nice to have links to blog entries. I think this is just what Kristen reported. People find these useful, interesting, helpful, especially if you're not an expert in the field. I care more about recent than popular. And ALMs are particularly important in mega journals because they give you some criteria to use when there's so much stuff there. Makes sense. This is probably why we're seeing in HighWire, we're seeing article metrics essentially in every one of the OA journals we work with. Article metrics is just part of what is the standard feature set, not so much in every other journal, but I think it will eventually spread there. What other expectations do people have of OA journals? So this is where there's other kinds of things they're looking for. For instance, they want to know that the fee is reasonable. So this is like a Consumer Reports kind of question. Can somebody tell me if they're charging the right amount? You know, the fees are pretty varied now. You've got everything from $99 to probably $4,500 or so. What makes that possible? It's okay to have advertising, lower the fees. The cost to publish needs to be clear. What we found is that some publishers, the fee is complicated. It's not obvious. People want to see that number. It's like seeing the price tag when you go to the store. You really want to know what it is right up front, because that's with our humanities and social science authors, that was very important, because they don't have money. They don't have funds coming from some other source. They need to know, is it $100? Is it $500? That will make a difference. This was interesting. I mentioned that about 350 journals at HighWire are hybrid open access journals. So an author pays a fee and the article becomes open when it's published. Most of the journals who do that flag it on the table of contents as an OA article. This author said, I might go for that. That gives me more visibility in that. I read OA articles more frequently because I read at home and don't have the annoyance of logging in. That was interesting. Clearly, there are barriers, and OA gets rid of them. And it really is, this person has access at home. She's a Stanford researcher. She can get access to everything that Stanford has, but it's annoying. I have to put in my username and password for my network ID. Another interesting suggestion is that OA articles, because they're seen by a wider audience, they should have a non-technical summary. They would be more useful if they had a non-technical summary. I think others would find the non-technical summary useful too. And quality. Again, this has to do with the visibility of policies. Peer review policy should be easily located. Needs rigorous peer review. So those are the expectations people were bringing to OA journals from our set of 9 interviewees. That's it. Thank you.